Part 5, the subjunctive.
So far in our discussion of verbs, we've talked about differences in person, number, and tense, and how we alter our verb to fit the situation. Well, there's one more way we can categorize verbs, and that's mood.
Generally speaking, there are two moods, the indicative and the subjunctive. The indicative mood is used to express things that are definite, clear, and factual. So far, just about everything we've covered has been indicative. The subjunctive is used to express things that are more subjective, things like emotions, wishes, doubts, and hypothetical situations.
So the subjunctive is a mood used primarily to express abstract or conceptualized actions or states.
In other words, the subjunctive is another thing you do to verbs in certain situations.
First, we'll show you how to make the subjunctive. Then we'll show you when you need to use it.
And then we'll show you a picture of me in a Speedo.
Lovely.
Before we go into when, where, and why you use the subjunctive, we're going to show you how to make it. So for now, just learn the endings. We'll show you where to use them later.
Section A, forming the subjunctive.
Making subjunctive verbs is a two-step process. First, we have to get the verb in the proper form. Then we have to tack on the appropriate ending.
We're going to use our old friend hablar to show you how to change AR verbs into the subjunctive. But first, we need to get the verb ready for its ending. Begin by putting the verb in its yo form. And since hablar has a regular conjugation, that would give us hablo. Then we knock off the O, and our verb is now ready for its ending. I know. It looks a lot like hablar stem. So why go through all this trouble? Think about all those weird yo forms you've run across in your days working with Spanish. Getting into the habit now of changing verbs to their yo form and knocking off the O will save you a lot of headaches in the future.
Here are the subjunctive AR endings.
Es, hemos, es, en.
Notice how these subjunctive endings for AR verbs look a lot like the regular endings for ER verbs. Kind of freaky. Let's stick them onto what's left of hablar and see what we get.
Hable, hables, hable, hablemos, habléis, hablen.
Check out how the first and the third person singular forms are the same. That means you have to rely on context to know which is being used. Let's look at a couple more AR examples.
Let's conjugate the verb llorar, which means to cry, in the subjunctive. First, we put llorar in its yo form, which is lloro. Then we chop off the O. And lastly, all we have to do is add the subjunctive AR endings.
Llore, llores, llore, lloremos, lloréis, lloren.
Warning, warning, exception, exception. While the method we just showed you for forming the subjunctive works about 90% of the time, there is something else you need to know. Way back when you first learned about stem change verbs, you probably learned that the nosotros and vosotros forms were immune to all stem changes. Like when you conjugate the stem change verb for to fly, volar. Volar is an O to UE verb, so its normal present tense conjugation would be vuelo, vuelas, vuela, volamos, voláis, vuelan. The O doesn't change in the nosotros and vosotros forms. Well, the same thing's true with the subjunctive.
Stay with us here. So if you conjugate volar in the subjunctive like we've been doing all along, we put it into its yo form, vuelo, chop off the O, then add our subjunctive endings. Vuele, vueles, vuele, vuelemos, vueles, vuelen. See something fishy? We have a stem change in the nosotros and vosotros forms, but we know that they're immune to any sort of vowel changes. So what do? We zap them back to normal. It's crazy, it's strange, but hey, that's why it's called advanced Spanish.
Okay, say I want to conjugate pensar, which means to think, in the subjunctive. First, I'd put it in its yo form. Okay, yo pienso. Okay, now I chop off the O and add the endings. Es, hemos, ais, and en. Okay, piense, pienses, piense, piensemos, pienseis, piensen. Okay, now wait a second. The nosotros and vosotros, I know that those forms never have vowel stem changes. so I better zap them back. Piense, pienses, piense, pensemos, penséis, piensen. Hey, I just conjugated the verb in the subjunctive. All right.
Now let's look at the ER and IR verbs. They work the same way. They just have a different set of endings.
A, as, a, amos, ais, an.
Let's use comer. First we put it in its yo form, como. Next, we chop off the O, and now we're ready for our ER, IR endings.
Coma, comas, coma, comamos, comáis, coman.
Again, check out how the first and third person singular endings are the same, just like with the AR verbs. Let's do an IR verb. How about salir? We change it to the yo form, salgo. Then we lose the O, and then we add our endings.
Salga, salgas, salga, salgamos, salgáis, salgan.
Are you getting the hang of it yet?
I think so. Let's see. We take the yo form pongo, cross off the O, then add the subjunctive ER and IR endings. So ponga, pongas, ponga, pongamos, pongáis, pongan. I did it. I did it! Now, of course, we have a few irregular nasties in the subjunctive that you just have to memorize.
We're not going to spend a whole lot of time rationalizing them. We're just going to show them to you for your self-edification.
That's right. Now, we're just going to show you 5. Ir, haber, saber, ser, and dar. So get ready.
Here they come.
Ir!
Vaya, vayas, vaya, vayamos, vayáis, vayan.
Haber!
Haya, hayas, haya, hayamos, hayáis, hayan.
Saber!
Sepa, sepas, sepa, sepamos, sepáis, sepan.
Ser!
Sea, seas, sea, seamos, seáis, sean.
Dar!
De, des, de, demos, deis, den.
Now, wasn't that fun?
That was fun.
Yeah, I agree. Well, if you didn't get all that, go back and review that last section again.
Now that you know how to conjugate verbs in the subjunctive,
Yeah, the normal ones and the bizarre ones.
let's look at exactly when, where, and why you use it.
Let's do that.
Let's.
Okay.
Good.
Section Uses of the Subjunctive.
Let's go over again what we mean when we use the word mood. We said that there are basically 2 moods, the indicative and the subjunctive, and that the subjunctive is used to express things that are more subjective, things like emotions, wishes, doubts, and hypothetical situations.
We use both the indicative and subjunctive moods in English. I am a fisherman. I wish I were a fisherman. These mushrooms are not edible. I don't think these mushrooms are edible. The mime sleeps. He is happy that the mime sleeps. Look at the sentences. I am a fisherman. These mushrooms are not edible. And the mime sleeps. The mood of these sentences is indicative because their actions are clear, factual, or definite. I am a fisherman. These mushrooms are not edible. The mime sleeps.
Now look at I wish I were a fisherman. I don't think these mushrooms are edible. And he is happy that the mime sleeps. These sentences have a subjunctive feeling about them because their actions are either abstract, uncertain, or emotional.
Look at some of these sentences back to back again. We'd say, I am a fisherman, and I wish I were a fisherman. I am and I were are both present first-person forms of to be. But I am is in the indicative mood, and I were is in the subjunctive.
Now look at our mushroom sentences. These mushrooms are not edible, and I don't think these mushrooms are edible. Again, we have a verb in the indicative and a verb in the subjunctive, but in this case, the form of the verb to be, are, doesn't change. The same thing is true for the mime sentences. When we say, the mime sleeps, and he is happy that the mime sleeps, we've got an indicative verb and a subjunctive verb, but again, they look the same. They're both sleeps.
So in English, most of the time, the subjunctive and the indicative look the same.
Which is why it can be hard for English speakers to figure out when to use the subjunctive. Just remember that if there's any sort of iffy element to your sentence, you probably need to use the subjunctive.
Let's look at a few examples of the subjunctive in Spanish.
Okay.
Let's ask Carlos if he wants Maria to come to his party. Carlos, ¿quieres que María venga a tu fiesta?
Sí, quiero que María venga a mi fiesta.
In both sentences, check out how we use the subjunctive forms of the verb venir, the ella form venga. We use the subjunctive because there was some degree of uncertainty about whether or not Maria is actually coming to the party. It's still up in the air.
At this point, you're probably panicking a little about this whole subjunctive thing. But don't worry. Most people learning Spanish find the subjunctive mood kind of tricky, so you're not alone. Fortunately, there are constructions we can look for that can give us a heads up. They're called verbs and phrases of volition. It's going to be all right.
What the heck is volition?
Volition's just a fancy way of saying something may or may not happen. Some of the more common verbs of volition are to want, to advise, to prefer, to suggest, basically all that wishy-washy stuff you already associate with the subjunctive. That's why we use the word volition.
Here's a list of some of the all-time greatest verbs of volition. Querer, to want, aconsejar, to advise, preferir, to prefer, mandar, to order or command, and sugerir, to suggest. You probably already know a couple of these. Here's how they work. You conjugate the verb of volition in the present tense, nice and easy. Then you add the word que, which basically means that. Then you add the main verb of your sentence, conjugated in the subjunctive. Don't panic if you didn't catch that. We'll walk you through this formula a bunch of times until you've got it down.
Let's translate the sentence. I suggest that you buy the car. First, you conjugate the verb of volition. Let's see. We're using the verb for to suggest, sugerir. So, we conjugate that into the present tense, which would be sugiero. Then we tack on que. That's easy. Okay, now we have you buy the car. The verb we'd use is comprar, to buy, and we're conjugating it into the tu form of the subjunctive. So, we take the normal yo form, knock off the o, and add es, compres. And there we go. Sugiero que compres el coche. Verb of volition plus que plus subjunctive.
Sort of a spin-off on all of this verbs of volition stuff is phrases of volition. These guys are even easier because you don't have to conjugate. They're prepackaged and ready to use. Here are some of my favorites.
Look at the phrases es importante, it's important, es necesario, it's necessary, es preferible, it's preferable, and es urgente, it's urgent. These are all phrases of volition, and we can pop them into our formula in the place of the conjugated verb of volition. Phrase of volition plus que plus subjunctive. They work the same way. You don't have to conjugate them or anything.
Let's plug one of those phrases of volition into our formula and see what we get. Let's say it's important that you don't run with scissors. Why? Because it's true. First, we call upon our phrase of volition that means it's important. Es importante. Then we tack on the que, and then we conjugate our main verb in the subjunctive, which would be tú corras. Then that's it. Es importante que no corras con las tijeras. You could poke your eye out.
Want to see something cool? Take a look at the sentences we've made so far with the verbs and phrases of volition.
Sugiero que compres el coche. Es importante que no corras con las tijeras.
Okay, what do all these sentences have in common? I don't know, could it be the word que? Yes, that que can be a big help in signaling that the subjunctive is about to happen. So when you hear the word que in a sentence, or you want to say the word that, prick up your ears and get ready to use the subjunctive. It won't work all the time, but by golly, it'll work most of the time.
Remember, keep a lookout for that K floating around out there. Odds are, whatever comes after the K will be subjunctive.
Friends, this past week with the chupacabra, I've learned something special. It's important that we not judge an animal by its appearance, especially the chupacabras. They need for us to know them, to understand them, and to love them. Amigos, esta semana pasada con la chupacabra he aprendido algo especial. Es importante que no juzguemos a un animal por su apariencia, especialmente a las chupacabras. Necesitan que las conozcamos, las entendamos y las queramos.
The subjunctive is a mood used when the actions of a sentence are subjective, abstract stuff, like emotions, wishes, doubts, and hypothetical situations. The subjunctive form of the verb is formed by changing the verb to its present tense yo form, chopping off the o, then adding the appropriate subjunctive ending. The subjunctive endings for AR verbs are a, amos, ace, and en. The subjunctive endings for ER and IR verbs are a, as, amos, ais, and an. And if once you've conjugated a verb in the subjunctive, you notice there's been a vowel stem change in the nosotros and vosotros forms, you have to zap those vowels back to normal.
There's a set of verbs and phrases that you can look for that usually signal the use of the subjunctive, and they're called verbs and phrases of volition. Two helpful constructions to keep in mind are verb of volition plus que plus subjunctive, and phrase of volition plus que plus subjunctive. And remember, be on the lookout for the word que. When you see it in a sentence, the subjunctive probably isn't too far behind.
Part 6. Commands.
The next topic on our verb quest is sort of a spin-off of the subjunctive. Commands, requests, telling people what to do. Most languages, like English and Spanish, have 4 basic kinds of sentences: statements, questions, exclamations, and commands. So far in Spanish, you know how to make the first 3.
Practically all of the sentences you've been using so far have been statements.
No he comido nada en todo el día. La comida va a ser muy deliciosa.
Questions are easy enough. Just use a handy question word, throw on a couple question marks, and there you go.
¿Dónde está el camarero?
And exclamations, the third kind of sentences, are easy. Just use exclamation points.
Tengo mucha hambre.
¿Puedo ayudarle, señor? Let's get started. We're going to divide commands into 2 categories, formal and informal. First up are the formal commands.
Section A, formal commands.
Before we get into the essentials of building commands, we have some good news. Commands are sort of an outgrowth of the subjunctive. Maybe because if I tell you to do something, I'm not sure if you're going to do it. So there's some uncertainty involved. That means a lot of the stuff in this section is going to look pretty darn familiar.
You use formal commands with anyone who you would refer to as usted or ustedes, like doctors, old people, and people you don't really know well. Also, remember that Spanish speakers in Latin America use ustedes for informal situations too, so keep that in mind. With all that being said, here's how you make formal commands.
We'll start with the AR verb, so let's pick one out. How about bailar? Okay, we take the yo form of the verb, which is bailo. We chop off the o, then add an e if we're commanding one person, an usted, and an en if we're commanding more than one person, or ustedes. And there you go. Now our verb is ready to use. Our usted command, baile, and our ustedes command, bailen.
So, we can use the usted command baile to command or request someone to dance.
Baile. Yo dije, baile. Y ustedes también bailen.
When we're using an usted or ustedes command, we can express it 2 ways. We can say the person we're addressing the command to after our verb.
Baile usted. Bailen ustedes.
Or we can just say the verb and let the usted or ustedes be implied.
Baile. Bailen.
This is how you'll see it most of the time, since you already have the different ending to let your listeners know it's a command.
The ER and IR verbs work almost the same way. Let's look at vender, to sell, and dividir, to divide. First, we change them to their yo forms, which gives us vendo and divido. Then we knock off the O's, and finally we add an A to the end if we're giving the command to one person, and an AN if we're commanding more than one person. That makes the command forms of the verbs venda and vendan, and divida and dividan.
Señoritas, divídanse en 4 grupos y vendan todas las que galletas. Este año vamos a dominar el jamboree.
This process of getting a verb ready to use as a command works exactly the same way with most of the verbs we've met so far that are irregular.
Look at the verbs pensar, tener, and possibly a new one, morir, an O to UE verb that means to die. Change them to their yo forms, pienso, tengo, and muero, knock off the O's, and put on the appropriate endings.
Piense, piensen, tenga, tengan, muera, mueran.
Remember that the AR verbs like pensar take E and EN endings, and the ER and IR verbs like tener and morir take A and AN as their endings.
Now for the irregular formal command forms, which you knew we would have to get to eventually.
The only irregulars that cause real problems are the command forms for the verbs ir, ser, and dar. The formal command forms for ir are vaya and vayan. For ser, they're sea and sean. And for dar, they're de and den. No rhyme or reason, just more fun stuff to memorize.
The only other weird issues we come across when changing verbs to their usted and ustedes command forms have to do with spelling and maintaining the proper sounds of the verb. We've seen this before. Remember earlier when we talked about how the sounds for the letters C and G can change depending on the vowel that comes after them? Well, the same issues arise when we try to add an E or EN to the stems of AR verbs.
Check out the verbs buscar and pagar. We can put them in their yo form, no problem. Busco and pago. But if we try to add an E or EN, the sounds of the C and G will change.
Buse, paje, no.
So in these cases, we make spelling changes to keep the sounds of the letters the same. We change the C into QU and the G into GU.
Busque, pague, sí, eso es.
Let's check back in with Danito and see how he's coming along with those groceries.
Señor, estoy buscando el cereal. ¿Dónde está?
So he's looking for the cereal, and he's asking the clerk for help.
Vaya al tercer pasillo y busque la estantería grande. Los cereales están allí.
Let's see if Danito can figure this one out. First, the clerk said, vaya al tercer pasillo busque. Looks like Danito remembers that vaya is the formal singular command form of the verb ir, to go. So vaya al tercer pasillo means go to the third aisle. The clerk was telling him to go.
And what about that second sentence? Busque la estantería grande. Hey, Danito, what's that Q doing in a form of the verb buscar? He knows you have to change the C in buscar to a QU to preserve that hard sound. She told Danito to look for the big display. The cereal's there. Congratulations, Danito. Cereal for dinner tonight.